suddenly try to get in a fight with China and invade them? Well, because the moment we tried to invade China, they'd launch a nuke, and our cities would explode. This is what's known as, what is?
Mutual annihilation.
Yeah, mutually assured destruction. Starting in about the 1950s to 1960s, war changed because as soon as you start losing a war now, you launch a missile. And as soon as that missile launches, like if you know your country's about to go down, there's no reason not to fire a nuke. And as soon as one person fires a nuke, everyone starts firing nukes. So nobody wants to do this. So if you are a small nation and you get pushed around by the bigger nations, what's the quickest, most effective way of making sure they don't push you around anymore?
Ball.
You get nukes. Why is it that North Korea, despite the fact that it is a small country with almost no economy, no power, no anything, is not someplace where we can just get rid of Kim Jong-un whenever we want? Well, because he's got nuclear missiles. So, if you have a country that you are trying to control, and they are trying to get nuclear weapons, and you want to keep having power over them, how do you make sure that they stay under your control? If you say are the United States, and there's another nation, call them Iran, who wants to start a nuclear program. You, as the United States, have a lot of allies in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia. Why are we so close to the Saudis? Oil. This classic diplomacy. They have oil, we give them good deals, money gets exchanged. Who is the main competitor to the Saudis in the Middle East? Iran. So, if you keep Iran from having a nuclear program, we have power over Iran. Also, another one of our closest allies is Israel. Yeah. Israel also has beef with Iran, to put it politely and mildly. These nations
has a lot of nukes, though.
Yeah. And Israel has a lot of nukes, which gives them a major advantage, even though they're smaller and less populous. If Iran, even though they're next door, were to invade Israel, Israel would shoot a nuke and that's the end of it. So Iran has reason to want to get nuclear weapons. And starting in the mid-2000s, they were really upping their program. Their program to do this level of uranium enrichment you need to make a nuclear bomb is much higher than would be used just for power plants. So, the way it works is, how many of you have seen what a centrifuge is? Do you know what a centrifuge is in a chemistry lab? Yeah. So basically, if you spin things really, so you know how if you take like a cup of water, put it on a string and spin it around your head, the water stays in the cup? Because the way the centripetal force works. So in the same idea, if you have something which is like kind of a mixture and you spin it really fast, all the heavy stuff goes to the bottom. So the basic idea is to enrich uranium to the level that you could use it to make a bomb. You have to spin it really, 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 really fast. And it has to be controlled down to like the revolution per second. And if it doesn't, then things go wrong and stuff can blow up. And you know what you don't want blowing up? Uranium, because it's the core of a nuclear bomb. So, this is a desert. Under this desert was the uranium enrichment plants of the Iranian government. This was under the desert, and they were trying to make the uranium to make nuclear bombs. All of a sudden, randomly, I can never remember the year, we're talking about 2008, the uranium in these centrifuges, things started going wrong. The centrifuges started blowing up. They started spinning too fast and not working. The Iranians had no idea what was going on. They shut down the program because all of these centrifuges that were underground, which were fundamental to making the program work, just stopped working. A few years later, New York Times publishes an article, or maybe it was the Washington Post, can't remember which one, explaining their best theory as to what happened. Does anyone know what their theory as to what happened, which is more or less confirmed at this point?
It's just like US kind of hired people to write a 1,000,000 code. So these code kind of affecting the level of uranium.
Code written. This code was so complicated that the only sorts of people who had the money to hire the number of coders needed to do this was nation-state governments. This code, what is a zero-day exploit? Does anyone know? So a zero-day, so basically every single sort of bug, so 0 day. Anytime there's a bug, as soon as it goes public, the people, so if Microsoft finds out there's a bug in their operating system, the moment they find out there's a bug, what do? They try to fix it. Usually, as soon as it gets out there, immediately patching starts. So, given that the moment a bug is found, somebody tries to fix it, which are the most valuable bugs? If you have your hand on a bug, which is the one you want your hand on?
The one that's the most difficult to fix.
Not just the most difficult. What's even better? What if it's even super simple? What do you want?
Or it's in the highest. Or it's the most.
Even? You have two bugs. One's super hard to fix, one's super simple. Why might you want the super simple one?
It's easy, time,
Because it's easier.
and time consuming too.
Here's
Not
an-
It's easier to debug.
What if Microsoft doesn't even know it's there? They can't start patching it until they know it's there. So even if the bug is simple, if you are the only person who knows about this bug, you can wait as long as you want and nobody's patching it. And because of that, you can come up with the perfect attack, and there's no clock. There's no anything. This is called a 0 day, because the people who are responding to it have 0 days to respond, because it's literally coming out of the blue. If you get a 0-day exploit in a major thing, these are selling for tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars in the black market. These are incredibly valuable. The Stuxnet code had 4, because this is how valuable this was. They wanted to make sure that the Iranian nuclear program was crippled. And this is the sort of thing where, like, hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. And the way it worked was they basically just installed a worm into the Iranian system, which shut it down. And the interesting thing was, this system was not in any way connected to the internet, because you wouldn't want to connect it to the internet because someone could hack. So they somehow got somebody on the inside to install this worm, which shut down the system. This was a case in which we literally, as a nation state, this was mainly carried out on, now there's good reason to think there was a new discovery about it. It seems like the main drivers were the United States and Iran, specifically like NSA and or USA and Israel. And so it was Mossad and then the US, like CIA, NSA were the main drivers, but then there was also assistance from the Netherlands and a few other places. And basically, what it was this was a case in which why is this so significant? What is the fundamental difference about this compared to this stuff before? Why is this such a big deal? Think if it's the year.
It wasn't necessarily about interest for or against terrorism or resistance. It was about political and
This is an attack of one nation state on another. Think about if it's the year 1950, what it would have taken to imagine the Manhattan Project. What was the Manhattan Project? Yeah, it was the
Atomic bomb.
Yeah, it was the original project by the United States to build the atomic bomb during World War II. Imagine that we were trying to do this and the Germans wanted to stop us. And what they wanted to do was stop our enrichment. What would it have taken in the year 1943 to stop the Manhattan Project?
someone could bomb it back.
You'd have to get German individuals into the country to set up a bomb and blow it up. No Americans set foot in Iran to do this. No Israelis set foot in Iran. They talked to somebody on the inside, or another possibility is one theory is that they just dropped a whole bunch of USBs, like in the area, and then somebody was dumb enough to pick one up, wonder what it was, and put it into the computer, which auto-installed the software. No one knows how it got in there, but it got in there.
Did you say bees?
USBs.
USB.
Like those little flash drives. I mean, I guess you could use these
I
too
thought
if they
you
were
were
really
saying
fun.
like US, like US.
No, no, like USB flash drives, not like American. We send in the little bees and the little poor goggles. Okay, that's an adorable image. Now I'm just gonna draw it up here.
I also miss that.
Okay.
I was like thinking so far ahead, okay, we have robotic bees.
Yeah. American USB.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
So this is our USB. No, it wasn't actually American
that.
bees, but that would have been hilarious. No, it was rather that like USB flash drives were dropped in. And so no one knows, but without ever setting foot in Iran, we shut down what was at the time Iran's like major push to try to like enter the world diplomatic stage. And this has, it ended up not setting them back more than a couple years, but it was still like a pretty big deal at the time.
So you're talking about like just the fact that now we have like the type of technology where we could do these type of things like in a like split.
Yeah, you can do it from around the world in a split second. Also, here's another thing, is we did this to Iran. Is Iran the only nation in the world that has computer systems?
No.
No. Is Iran even the most computer sophisticated nation in the world? No. The biggest thing about Operation Olympic Games and Stuxnet was it was the first documented case of a full-on cyber attack. And once that door was opened, who started playing by these rules? Everybody. As soon as this was what do we mean by a proof of concept? You show that something is possible, and as soon as you show it's possible, everybody else knows it's possible and is willing to work towards it.
Right now we are facing the same thing from China.
So, this is Olympic Games. This was the first case. What is 61398?
Isn't that PLA 61398?
Yeah.
That
What
has
does
to-
PLA stand for? Anyone know? People's Liberation Army. What is the People's Liberation Army? What are they
It has to deal
associated
with
with?
China.
Yeah, it's a division of the Chinese government.
Yeah.
Unit 61398 is a Chinese unit who is full of this is their best hacking team. And what has Unit 61398 done? There's a great quote from, who was James Comey? You may have heard of him.
Comey? You said Comey?
Comey, C-O-M-E-Y, I think?
Yeah.
He was the former head of the FBI. Here's a great quote. He said there are two types of companies in the United States. Those who have been hacked by China, and those who don't know they've been hacked by China. What has Unit 61398 done? Basically, Unit 61398 is associated with the Chinese government, and what they have done is hacked into anything they can hack into worldwide to collect information. So, if you've heard of Chinese hacking, it's probably come in some association with this. And they have hacked things like, well, Google for one. Unit 61398 got into Google, hacked, this was like 2000, I have the date here. I want to say it was 2013. May have been a little earlier. But yeah, hacked into Google, got Google emails, got Google, they found the secret recipes of how the algorithms work were taken by Unit 61398 from Google. What did they do with this? Does anyone know what, amongst other things, this was done with these formulas? Can you use Google in China?
No.
No, you can't. China has shut down Google because Google refuses to use, China has very strict regulations on freedom of speech. There are certain things you are not allowed to post, and you're not allowed to exit or access Google from within China. And because you can find things on the China, it's just like a censorship thing. The Chinese government does not want people to know everything about them, and they like to control the information. And so one way of doing this is to prevent websites which go out of that from having access. You also cannot access Facebook from within China. So, what if you wanted to Google search from China? What do you use? Does anyone know?
VPN.
So one, you can use a VPN. So what's a VPN? Virtual Private Network? What does it do? Does anyone know?
It's kind of change your IP address, kind of.
Yeah, so what it does is it basically is a way of disguising your IP address, which bounces the signal to other places. So your IP address is basically like your home address, like my computer's, it's almost like your computer's name. And so every time you send out like a thing, it says, I'm this computer and I'm searching for this. It tells basically anyone who wants to know on the other end, they can find out who you are. So the best thing, you can just like disguise your name. And so that's what a VPN does. By bouncing the signal generally through another country, it hides who you really are on the internet. So that's one way to get around it. So if you're in China, you can contact a VPN in, say, Germany, and then that'll contact Google. And so the Chinese won't realize that you're connecting to Google. But Most people are not sophisticated enough to use VPNs. So what do they use? Anyone know?
They use Chinese version.
Yeah, it's called Baidu. It's the second largest search engine in the world, and no one quite knows how Baidu got so big, but shortly after Google was hacked, Baidu started taking off. You can connect the dots. So, who else has been hacked by Unit 61398?
The Wall Street.
Yeah, Wall Street banks were hacked. All the information on banking is hacked and taken. Now, what did they do with it? This is the amazing thing you don't quite know.
I think I'm trying to connect the dots. After the crisis of 2008, all the skyscrapers in the New York City mostly are owned by Chinese billionaires.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and this is the thing, and why, part of the reason why any sort of, there's good reason to think that the financial crisis was not caused by China in any way, but there's definitely a good reason to think they benefited in a lot of ways. But also just things like, think about, here's another thing, in the United States, who owns companies? Who owns Google?
Google owner.
The CEO is associated through shareholders. They're privately owned. The relationship between business and private companies is not the same every country in the world. There are a lot of places in which state businesses own companies, or companies are much more closely controlled by the state. So in China, if you are somebody who owns an American investor cannot own a Chinese, directly own a Chinese company. It has to be bought through a complicated thing where you have to buy a Chinese, you can't have your American company based in China. You have to buy a Chinese company, which is then a subservient to your It's very complicated, but it's about control and making sure that things are kept under control. So in this sort of case, if you are a Chinese company who has close associations with the government, and you want to get a step up on other places, the best way to do it is to start stealing and accessing documents from American companies. So what's a quicker way of getting information? The quickest way to get we want to build a new oil plant. We want to get a new oil pipeline. Well, who's got the best oil pipelines? You find out who's got the best oil pipelines, you hack them. And this is the sort of thing that you're seeing a lot, and a lot, and a lot. And most of this, just to be clear, in the past 5 years, China's kind of eased off a lot of this sort of explicit hacking. But during the late 2000s, early 2010s-ish, this was a rampant sort of thing, which China was using to get an advantage. Here's a case. So, if you were to describe, if I were to hack into Google's emails, what do we call it? I personally do it. It's a crime. It's cybercrime. What happens if the people doing it are working for the Chinese government? So think about this. China is hacking Google. These are people in the employ of the Chinese government. Is this just a crime? What is it? Okay, so it's espionage, but they're hacking a private company? Usually when you think espionage, you're thinking about them hacking another government organization. Like the CIA hacking the Soviet KGB, or the KGB hacking MI6. You don't think of a Chinese government employee hacking Google being an act of espionage, but it kind of is. Was that a hand?
Yeah, there's cyber terrorism.
Yeah, and then there's this other thing of oh, maybe this is cyber terrorism. Maybe this is just a case of but usually when you think of terrorism, you don't think about nations committing terrorism. You think of groups that are sub-nations. So ISIS, Al-Qaeda, any sort of according to certain parts of the US government, the Black Panthers were considered a terrorist organization. You don't think of full nations. So it seems like terrorism doesn't quite apply either. And it seems crime, it seems like it's more than crime, because this is a country. And so, okay, so it's espionage. And so what you're saying now is, if you are somebody who's having espionage committed against you, you need a counter-spying agency. Why? The CIA spends a lot of time spying on others, but it spends just as much time preventing others from spying on us. So now you're saying Google needs its own version of the CIA to protect it. So now Google needs a foreign policy. It's wait, what? Google needs a foreign policy. On top of this, to make things even more complicated, Unit 61398, these guys were working for the government. What did they do for their night jobs? Anyone know? They worked for private Chinese companies as hackers. So sometimes from their computer they were hacking for the government. Other times they were hacking for private companies from the same computer IP address. So if you find out a particular person is hacking, you don't know whether they're hacking on behalf of the Chinese government or on behalf of a private company or just because they want to. What's the issue here? If you're the United States and you find out the Chinese government is hacking into your computers, what is the push to do? Like, what do you think that US government should do in this case? If the US finds out that Google has been hacked by a Chinese hacker group with connections to the Chinese government, what do you think, like, what's the natural response? If you, say you worked for Google and you found out that your email address was hacked and all the information was taken back to China, what are you going to want to know? What are you going to want done?
Retribution.
You want some sort of retribution. You want to know why this happened, how it happened, and you want to know that something's being done about it. What's the Chinese government going to say in this case?
That a private.
It was a private individual. We had no control over this person. And what's the US going to say in response to that?
We have to find that.
Lie.
Here's what the US is going to say.
Lie.
Oh, shucks. Because there's not really anything you can do. So, tied in with Unit 6.1, this is the most interesting one, because this ties in a whole bunch of things we've talked about this semester. What does this stand for? Anyone know?
Other people's money.
Other
Okay,
people-
that is a good one, but that's not the one I was thinking of. It stands for Office of Personnel Management, which is a really boring name for the most boring part of the United States government. What is the Office of Personnel Management? Basically, they're the HR department of the US government. What, amongst other things, is OPM responsible for? Well, if you want a job in the government, what do you have to do? How many of you have ever applied or have met anyone or have heard about anyone applying for the US government? Can you show up one day with your resume and say, I'd like one job at the CIA, please?
No.
No. What do you have to do?
Background check.
Background check. What degree of background check do you need to get security clearance? Does anyone know?
Private,
Pardon?
private clearance?
Sorry.
Private clearance?
Yeah, so you need to get clearance through this. And does anyone know anything about how complicated this is? To get clearance, to get security clearance, top secret or top secret clearance for the United States government. If you even apply to be a contractor, so you don't actually have to work for them. If you've ever applied, you have to fill out a 157-page document. This includes your family, every single bank account you have, every partner and ex-partner you have, any foreigner you have had any interactions with on a regular basis over the past 10 years. You have to include all of your lovers and mistresses, all of your private information, where you went to college, what drugs you smoked in college. All of this information is in this 157-page document, and all of it, for in the year I think it started in 2013, 22.5 million Americans had this information stored in the Office of Personnel Management, because anyone who applies has to fill out the document. This also includes such things as, are you in debt? So, this is being stored in the US government's Office of Personnel Management, which none of you have really heard of.